Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Robin. I'm Marketing Director at MBS and delighted to be hosting today's session. Today's session is all about optimizing lead generation. So this is the next in our series of marketing masterclasses, specifically targeted at building product manufacturers who are looking to get more exposure on their products, get more specifications, and ultimately grow their business through increased orders. So welcome to the audience. Hopefully some of you have tuned in for our sessions previously. We've covered all manner of topics around construction marketing. If you haven't seen those, they're all available on demand on our website, so please do have a look. And yeah, so welcome to our panel today. So I'm delighted to have some fantastic guests with us today who are going to experts on lead generation and all things construction marketing. So we're going to be running for up to 90 minutes today. We'll see how we go. Between 60 and 90 minutes. We'll see how the discussion's going and see what questions are coming through. We tend to find there's usually lots of interesting debate and conversation and lots of questions from the audience as well. So just before I introduce the panel, we've got a great number of people dialed in for the session today. So thanks again for joining us. Just for logistics, everyone's, apart from the panel, obviously, everyone's mics are muted, but we would welcome and encourage you to please do ask questions of the panel. You can do that via the Q&A feature on the that you should see on your Zoom console. So not the chat, but the Q&A. And if you put questions through there, we'll review those, and we've saved some time at the end to pick through those and hopefully answer as many of your questions as we can. So format of today, really, we're going to be working through just 5 or 6 kind of key discussion points about lead generation, what it is for construction manufacturers, you know, how to manage it, how to optimize for it, what the strategies and the techniques and the tools are that you can be employing in order to get the most success. So that's the order of the day. Like I said, I'm delighted to introduce the panel. So without further ado, I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves one by one and just give a quick overview of kind of who they are and what they do. So in no particular order other than the order that's on my screen, I'm delighted to first introduce Chris Ashworth from Competitive Advantage. Chris, welcome to the panel. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much, Robin. Good morning to everybody. So my name is Chris Ashworth. I've been in the industry rather longer than I'd like to admit, to be honest. The first 20 years were working for building product manufacturers in both sales and marketing roles. So although I started in traditional product management, I've switched between the two, being a national sales manager, marketing director, specification sales manager at various times. So I've sort of seen both sides of that process. In the last 20 years, I've been, I founded Competitive Advantage, and we do market research, general consultancy support, and sales training, very much of it around the specification sales process. And amongst other things, I've been members of various committees, currently on the organising committee of CIMSIG, the Chartered Institute of Marketing Construction Industry Group. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, nice to see you again, Chris, and thanks very much for joining us today and bringing all your knowledge and insights. Looking forward to discussion. Next, we've got Liam Bateman, who's Managing Director of Think Tank. So, Liam, over to you.
Morning, yes, thanks, Robin. Hi, yes, as Robin said, I'm Liam. I'm Managing Director at the Think Tank. We're a B2B marketing agency working internationally for clients across lots of different sectors, but with a specialisation within the construction sector. Working for manufacturers, working for contractors, working for trade associations, both in the UK, but also globally. So working with people like Saint-Gobain globally, etc., and as well as a variety within the UK. We complete range of services within the marketing gambit, completely integrated. So we go everything from strategy all the way through to tactical implementation, everything from point of sale and promotions in merchants to PR and high level content and thought leadership pieces. So yeah, everything which feeds into this topic.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for joining us, Liam. Good to have you on. Next, we've got Matt Lowe from Glenigan, who for anyone who kind of follows NBS will know that NBS and Glenigan are now sister companies. So bit of a match made in heaven, but really nice to welcome you on, Matt. Do you want to just give us a little introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Lowe from Glenigan. I've worked for Glenigan for about 20 years now as a key account manager and key account director. So I work with a lot of big manufacturers, contractors, and others throughout the construction industry. Work directly with their users, their sales and marketing teams, to help them maximize the use of the Glenigan data and other data sets, and give advice on how to generate excellent leads for their sales teams, and get the very best from that data.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, welcome on board, Matt, and I look forward to hearing from you as we go through. And so last but absolutely by no means least on the panel, we've got Izzy Herrera, who is MBS marketing manager, who works very closely with construction manufacturers. So welcome, Izzy. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, as Robin said, I'm the marketing manager at MBS, so I look after the marketing activity for our manufacturer audience. So organising webinars such as these would be under my remit. Brilliant.
Right, well, welcome again to the panel. We've got some great experience and knowledge, so look forward to all that coming out as we move through the discussion. So let's move on and get things started, really, shall we? So the first area that we wanted to cover, it's always important to start from the top, really. So lead generation, what do we mean by it? What does it mean to construction manufacturers, and how would we kind of define it before we jump into the rest of the conversation? So Liam, I was wondering if you maybe wanted to kind of kick us off with this one and give us your take on what it is and what it should mean and why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we need to think about this in the lead generation as a variety of meanings. There's so many different types of leads that you can generate, and quite often it comes down to the time frame of that lead becoming a sale and being classed in different ways in that respect. So if we think about brand marketing, for example, now brand marketing is something that's going to help support lead generation, but it's a longer term item. Whereas search advertising is going to generate leads in the short term, but they all impact upon each other. So we need to think of it holistically. You need to think that every action that you do within marketing is a lead generation activity. It just happens to be that some are more direct than others. So when we think about that, it's thinking about, nurturing leads towards a purchase, a sale, contract, whatever that might be. Some leads are going to come through that are ready to buy. Some leads are going to want more information, and other leads just have an interest maybe in the topics you're talking about. And that's where you need to nurture them along. So I think when we think about what lead generation is, we need to think of it in a very broad context, because everything you do from a marketing perspective and sales perspective will feed into that lead generation. And everybody that interacts with a customer, whether that's through direct interaction or not, will have an influence upon that lead generation. So hopefully it doesn't specifically say this is lead generation, because I don't think you can say this is lead generation. We have to think of it in the round, I believe.
Chris, can I bring you in there and see what your thoughts are around that?
Well, follow that is really the first one. I think Liam's made a very comprehensive summary of the situation. The only thing I could add on top of that really is thinking about the initial pool you're looking at. So depending on your nature of your business, are we talking about clients, architects, engineers, main contractors, specialist subcontractors, and making sure that you're focusing in on that right pool? And really, it's then just starting from all those people in that group to those that have a relevance to you and to whom you have a relevance, and then following the process Liam described, which I thought was very comprehensive.
Yeah, great. So building on that then, Matt, what is a good lead? What does a good lead look like, or what should a good lead look like for a construction manufacturer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been on the other side of the fence as well, where I've been in my early career, I was in direct sales, and I've been given leads over the years of varying quality, shall we say. And I do think a really good lead is something where there is obviously a need. There is, an inquiry that's come to you where your products are going to be needed on that particular, let's talk about a construction project. Maybe it's already specified, You know, that would be a very good project lead, one where you know your products are already already required in the project itself. There could also be a lead regarding the companies themselves that have a propensity to use your products. So being able to identify new companies you're not working with that already use your products, maybe from a competitor, all of these things would be a good lead for a manufacturer. It's really still just the first step towards the sale though, but it does get you closer than just, you know, a random call to an architect or a contractor.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Izzy, just building on that point, I mean, the lead generation is so important, isn't it? Because it's, you know, without wanting to spell out the obvious, it is the very top end of the funnel, and it's really the place where all business development and growth activities can start from. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think if we just go back to the sort of start where Liam was sort of explaining that holistic approach, I think like that really resonates with sort of like our approach to like lead generation in general, is there are multiple different touch points. But then when you then kind of like really go down to the granularity of like what is a good lead, I think it's having like, you know, making sure the business has a need, especially in B2B. It's like, does the business have a need? But also, have you kind of contacted, have you identified the right job role? Because it might be that, you know, your product, or you might not be with the person who makes the decisions, or is the person that you've like got as the lead, do they have influence on the person who can make the overall decision? So I think when you look at the leads, it can keep going down more specifically to, can this person make a purchase or make a decision, and if not, do they actually have influence over someone who can?
Yeah,
really
yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, that there are leads and leads, aren't there? And you know, a cold lead where you might just have contact information for someone who's never heard of you is very different to a highly qualified lead where you might have someone's information, their job title. You might know that they've expressed an interest in whatever product it is that you sell, whether that's through, you know, looking at your website or downloading a piece of content or something like that, and being ready for follow-up versus one that needs nurturing. And of course, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this more in the digital age that we're in now. You know, the wealth of opportunities with different data and touch points to you know, enhance the level of information that we've got about different leads, and then manage them more effectively depending on where they are. Is you know, there's a huge amount of data out there and tools to do that. So we're going to come at some of that in a moment.
Robin, can I just add another point that comes through there? I think it's also about timing. And so, for example, if we take a situation with a project where it's maybe an architect designing it, and it's not just architects. I think everybody in the industry at the moment is so very, very busy for a variety of different reasons that you've got to get the timing right. So you might have the name of someone who will be wanting to specify your product, but if you contact them when they're in the early stages of working on drainage and yours is, I don't know, ceiling tiles, then they're not going to want to talk to you, even though that product is relevant and maybe what they want. Now, it's really, really difficult to get that timing right. But I think the timing is another key issue there. I haven't got a solution how you get the timing right. I just highlight that fact because, you know, there's so much stuff that we all get bombarded with. There's the risk of it just being batted away or not taking your call or whatever.
Yeah, Chris, I totally agree with you. I often talk about project maturity. If you think about the lifetime of a project, projects have planning and contract lifetimes. And, you know, specification can happen often at the early stages, but can actually happen right the way through the process. And the contractors sometimes involved in those decisions, sometimes the designers as well. So you're absolutely right. I think you need to look at the maturity of a lead in itself. You know, so if you can find a service that tracks right the way through a project lifetime and enables you to dip in at the right times for you, then you're going to have greater success.
Yes, and again, very often the decision is being made at different points in the REBA plan of work. So, for example, at the start, there's the concept stage and the pricing. So if your product is quite an expensive product versus some of the alternatives, it might have value for that price. But if it hasn't been put into the budget, when they subsequently come to look at it in detail, the chances of getting it included is very, very slim because the money's just not there for that aspect of it. So you need to be there at the start to make sure the pricing is right when they're pulling the budget together, but probably then there'll be a follow-on point at a later stage when they're actually coming to the detailing, when they'll want to continue the conversation. It's pretty much unique for every product in terms of getting those touch points right. And being able to identify when there's that level of interest is really hard. Although I do believe there is a service available, Robin, isn't there, that maybe helps with that?
Yeah, there is, and hold that thought actually, because we're gonna come back to this topic around how lead generation, how you adapt your approach across the different kind of stages of the timeline. I wanted to jump onto the.
Can I just say one other thing just about that?
Yeah, go on.
Really important is when we're talking about defining lead generation. I think you need to think of it from an internal aspect as well, because the definition of a lead internally will vary right the way across an organization. So although we're talking mostly here about external, how do we get leads externally, I think what you need to always think about initially is how you define a lead within your business, because marketing people will talk about a lead in a completely different way to how salespeople will talk about a lead. And your C-suite will talk about a lead in a very different way to how the sales team will talk about a lead. So I think it's really important that from an outset of any lead generation activity, that you define that across all the different parties that are involved in it, so that everyone understands what those leads are at which point within that process and that funnel as it goes through.
That is a perfect segue actually into the next question, Liam, which is around who's responsible for lead generation. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, that that there's not necessarily a one size fits all approach, but what you don't want is probably conflict between different areas of the business who might look at lead generation in different ways, because ultimately the lead generation should be there to support the overall business plan, because it's the bit that feeds the machine, if you like, in terms of getting inquiries in and ultimately leading to sales and orders. So Chris, maybe interested in your experience around how responsibility should work and what you've seen across different organizations.
Sadly, what I've seen is very often a case where the marketing team come up with a great idea. And I know Glenigan have had this challenge in years gone by, because I've worked with them on trying to improve the understanding. But marketing say, hey, this is a great idea, let's subscribe to Glenigan. And then they say to sales, there you go, guys. And the salespeople, well, what's this? Why do I want it? Well, Glenigan obviously do want, but there's this mismatch between what marketing think is a good idea and what sales want to do. So I think in terms of who's responsible, it needs to be someone who can pull that together and coordinate between the sales and marketing functions to make sure there is total buy-in to the whole thing, because it's got to work all the way through, as Liam alluded to a minute ago. At the same time, I think it's about that monitoring and adjusting it, making sure that it's tweaked and changed in that way. What I've certainly seen in the last 12 months is marketing teams taking more responsibility for that early identification of opportunities, particularly using CPD and organizing CPD seminars. But you've got to make sure that the people that have to follow it up are ready to do that and committed to doing it. So that would be a non-answer in a way. It's important. It doesn't matter the job role as long as they can have that overview.
Matt, that has to be over to you really to kind of, what are your perspectives on that, where you might have marketing teams that are fully invested and understand the use, Glenigan as an example in this, but there's not always that communication with sales.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it all the time. Often with smaller companies where maybe a senior director takes the decision to subscribe, and then I meet the sales team and they're like, well, what is this? I think Glenigan's quite well known now, so a lot of the time people have previous experience, and that's not such an issue. But in terms of who's responsible for lead generation, at Glenigan, largely it is our marketing team who generate the leads and then feed them through and keep a constant supply of that information through to the sales teams. But I think individual salespeople have responsibility to do that as well. There are so many things you can use, like LinkedIn these days, to expand your network and to find opportunities yourself if you're not getting enough through there. And then obviously a third-party tool like Glenigan really does give businesses the opportunity to either go on a bulk marketing exercise with the data, or for the individuals to try and find really nice focused leads for themselves within that system. So it's a little bit like everybody's got a bit of responsibility for it, in my opinion.
Definitely, yeah. Izzy, would you say that? So in terms of making sure that you've got that, shared ownership between sales and marketing and really good processes in place to support that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's like the key aspect for us, sort of a lead gen campaign really, or any lead gen activity to be successful, is making sure that there's a strong link between marketing and sales and good communication. I think also going back to Liam's point earlier about the definition within a business, it is really like everybody sitting down and explaining what they see as a lead. Like I know we've done an exercise like that early on when I started, which was, what does a lead mean to me? What does a marketing qualified lead mean? And what does a sales qualified lead mean? And what's an opportunity? Because they were all different, like they're all different. And it's just making sure that everybody understands, like if we're talking about leads, we're talking very high level there. We're not saying that they're necessarily marketing qualified yet, but they have shown an interest, and they are, they're kind of the one step before becoming marketing qualified and starting to go through that journey. So I think when you're defining it, you're then starting to define whose responsibility that lead is at that moment in time. And then having, I think, the responsibility for the lead gen of, it's not just sales relying on marketing, it's then sales feeding back like, oh, this campaign gave really good leads, this campaign not so much, and being open and honest and having that transparency. So if sales don't tell you that the leads that you've generated that you thought were good, marketing qualified, tick. If you just only look at that marker, but actually not many of them converted into a sales qualified lead, and not many converted into an opportunity. If you don't look at that data, then actually you're kind of missing out a key step, because ultimately, from my experience, we're generating leads and generating marketing qualified leads because we want sales at the end of it. And if the sales aren't coming through, but we're generating thousands of leads, but actually none of them are converting, that's an issue. So yeah, I kind of definitely agree.
That virtuous circle of communication between marketing and sales, whereby marketing are keeping sales in the loop and discussing their activities and what's coming up, and making sure that sales understand it and know what to do with it, and then that you've got the constant loop of feedback from sales into marketing to say, yeah, these leads were no good, these ones were brilliant, we need to focus more on these sectors, these are the types of conversations that we're having with prospects, etc., etc. So you can feed that back into marketing. And that's definitely one thing that for listeners, if you don't have that process ongoing in your business at the moment, it's certainly worth looking at in terms of getting that, like I say, a virtuous circle of communication going.
And sometimes it could even be that actually they are a quality lead, but you sent them over to sales too early. So again, it's looking at that, well, what was it about the lead that was poor? Was it just they weren't ready to buy? If so, could they go back into like just our general marketing pool and we keep marketing to them, and then there might be another opportunity to sell to them when they're at a better, they're sort of like further down the funnel? Because again, it's sort of, or was it just that they were completely wrong, they were the completely wrong target market? So it's also kind of drilling down. If someone says it's a bad lead, it's trying to find out why, to help inform your campaigns in the future.
Absolutely, and that's where we get into the concept of lead nurturing, which I think we'll probably come back to in just a moment.
And I think Robin, if I could feed something into this as well, because
sure.
I come from a slightly different angle with this, in the basis that a lot of what I do with my clients is around strategy. So it's when I look at who's responsible for lead generation, actually I look at it that everyone in an organization is actually responsible for lead generation, rather than just sales and marketing. Apologies.
Yep.
It's flying up in front of my screen. There we go. So I look at it, everyone is responsible for lead generation, because at the end of the day, everyone within an organization is a brand ambassador, whatever they do, and they all have an impact upon lead generation. So that interaction with the business, whether that is a face-to-face interaction, whether it's with a product, whether it's whatever it might be, delivery, etc., is really important to generating leads. So if you take that, one of your most valuable leads that you can get is a referral. If you can get a referral from somebody, then that is a really valuable lead, because somebody is singing your praises. It's really important. But when we think about that referral, quite often that referral is about a good product or a good service. Maybe it's a exceptional delivery or on time or whatever that might be. And then if you think about the people that influence that referral lead, it's actually the person in manufacturing who's delivering a really high quality product and ensuring that they are actually on top of that and have the pride in their work that they're going to deliver that product to the best quality they can. Or it could just be the delivery, it could be your logistics that are going out on time, etc. So I think it doesn't matter who it is within an organization. everybody is responsible for lead generation in their own way because they all have an influence upon that. But of course, it always comes back down to sales and marketing as being the two departments that are going to have to generate those leads.
And just to build on that, of course, another important aspect are the technical advisory team. And I know in some organizations they are part of marketing, but there's nothing better as a lead than someone who's already contacted you asking you for information. And again, the worst thing a technical person can do is just give the answer. Yes, obviously you've got to give the answer and advice, but it's an opportunity. You need to find out what's the project that this is for, where's the stage that you're at, all that kind of information.
How can you help further?
Yes, it's really important that those technical people, and again, I know what happens is if you've got a backlog of questions that you've got to deal with, emails coming in, online questions, phone calls, the rest of it, it's about, well, let's answer this and get rid of it and move on to the next. But that's a crime. It really is important to make sure that when you have an inquiry like that, you get the maximum benefit you can from it. Because as I say, that's somebody who wants to buy. So don't miss that.
Absolutely. Completely agree with all that. So I think we're saying that, you know, ultimately the business as a whole is responsible for lead generation, and that, you know, everyone has a role to play in it, but perhaps marketing and sales, if you like, are the day-to-day engine of delivering and driving and managing all that. But you know, when you're getting opportunities to speak with leads and prospects, it doesn't matter where it is in the business, there needs to be a process in place to make sure that you're you know, able to maximize the opportunities with those. So that
an understanding by everybody within the business, their impact upon lead generation and sales and the business as a whole and the brand, basically.
Absolutely. So again, that leads a nice segue into the next part of discussion, which was really around what does successful lead generation look like? Now, obviously, it's going to be different for every business, but Matt, I was wondering if you wanted to maybe just chip in on this one to get us going in terms of what does good look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think it's easy to think of just volume and to think of the more leads, the better.
Yeah.
But actually, on an individual basis, if I'm a salesperson being fed leads, being fed 200 leads a week is as bad as being fed 3. You know, you want to find what I call like the Goldilocks zone, the swamp and starve, if you like. So you don't want to have too much, but you don't want to have too little. It needs to be just right so that you look forward to receiving the leads the following week. And obviously the leads have to be good quality. So it's a combination of quantity and quality, and, you know, absolutely focused, relevant opportunities of the right sort of maturity, which we touched on earlier. There's no point in calling somebody for a project that doesn't start for 3 years, unless you're obviously involved in early specification. So it's understanding where you fit into that project process, and making sure that the leads are of the right volume and the right quality as well.
Yeah, great. So yeah, you'd rather have 20 highly qualified leads probably than 100 poor quality leads, where actually you're only going to convert a very small number of them, whereas on the high quality ones you might convert more. Izzy, what about you in terms of thinking about, you know, what does good look like in terms of lead generation?
I think for just looking at it holistically is making sure you've got a mix of those long-term and short-term lead types. So if you're kind of targeting, like looking at your market or like looking at your funnel, your sales funnel, and making sure that you've got like some short-term leads that, you know, like you sort of talked about there, Matt, about, you know, is the project like ready to go? So it's sort of like they're your short-term, and making sure you've got built up a good relationship with them, but then also like taking a step back. And obviously what we do is around the realms of specification marketing, but that is like a long-term strategy, but it's making sure you've got a good mix of both. Because with the long-term leads, they just keep coming through, and if you've identified them, got into the specification, you've identified who's added you to the specification, you can make sure that they've specified you correctly, but also then use that as a building block to make sure, you know, to see where does, you know, who's then going to be the contractor and go through the project process. Now you've got that information. So I do think, successful lead gen, if I look more at like my own role, it's making sure for the sales team that we're feeding in the kind of the leads at the right time, but also have a pool of leads that maybe we haven't passed over to sales yet, but we're gathering them and we're taking them on a nurturing journey, so that when it is the right time, we can then hand them over at that point. So it's that mix for me.
Absolutely. So Liam, we touched on it earlier, didn't we, in terms of the concept of I guess, brand building activity alongside kind of tactical day-to-day activity that's, you know, on the one hand going to fill the funnel with leads on a month-to-month basis, but at the same time building your brand for the long term. You know, what sort of balance needs to be struck there to get it right?
Yeah, it is a challenge to do that. I think the where you need to come back to is the aspirations of the business. So it comes back to what are the business goals over the short to long term, and how then you blend that marketing lead generation in with those aspirations. So I think it's really interesting to firstly look at, okay, are we on a growth trajectory, or are we happy with where we're at and we just want to keep it ticking over? What are the goals of the organization as a whole, and then to match that type of activity to those goals. So if you then to look at, okay, what are the influencing factors upon lead generation? Okay, firstly, okay, it's the value of the product. Then it's the audience size, the needs of the audience, the conversion or the conversion timeframes for a particular product. All those different factors leading in that you then, when you blend those together for your particular organization, your business, and what you offer to the market, it's okay, if we're going to have a lead time of 9 months because it's a specification product rather than a bag of nails, then, you know, that we've got to build that in. But how does that match to the aspirations of the business and where the board want to take the business, their goals, their targets, etc.? So trying to blend those two together is so important at the outset, to make sure that you're matching the aspirations of the organization rather than just going off and, as Matt said, throwing leads at people that they can't handle, they don't have the resource to handle, etc. So I think, yeah, just making sure, coming back to that, you know, where is the business going? What do we want to do with the business? How do we want to grow? Do we have the resources to grow? And the right type of lead generation for the short and then medium and longer term.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, we were talking just before the session about, obviously within our industry, construction at the moment, there's a lot of talk around materials shortages and so on. And some manufacturers may be thinking that, you know, it's a good time to scale back a bit on their marketing because they may have shortage of product, they may have enough orders on their books. What would you say to anyone that was kind of thinking around that at the moment?
I think do it at your peril. Again, I've seen it again on a number of occasions. One of the jobs I've had to do is to go in and help companies set up specification sales teams. And that's because in the past, companies have looked at the costs, said, how can we save some money? Let's take out these guys who cost so much and aren't producing anything this week. They take the team out, and for 6, 9, 12 months, they don't notice any difference. And that's because, of course, as Liam just mentioned, it's a long tail between the person making the decision to specify a product and actually being purchased. So yes, there's a lot to deal with at the moment. But I think if you just redirect your resource away from these medium to long-term activities, you will pay for it in a year to 2 years' time. And what is also pretty certain is in a year to 2 years' time, these problems will have gone away. It'll become a much more aggressive and tougher market. And so those companies that have neglected it will pay the price. So yes, it's really important.
Yeah. And so go on, Liam.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that, to Chris's point there, because it's really interesting. There's a piece of research, I haven't got it to hand at the minute, but I've looked at it before and written about it before. But if you relate this to a similar scenario of a country being in recession, and do you market in a recession or don't you market in a recession? The research says that after the last major recession, that businesses that continue to market and retain their brand presence throughout that recession actually were 3 to 4 times more likely to be a success afterwards than the businesses that hadn't maintained that. And it's exactly the same type of scenario here. Just to roll back on the basis that you've got a full order book doesn't help with that generation of business in the future. And I think it's really important to think of it that marketing is about long term. It's not just about the short term lead gen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, guys. I wanted to slightly move the discussion on. Talk one thing that we want to mention is around inbound versus outbound. And Izzy, I was maybe wondering if you might just give us a quick kind of summary for anyone out there who's in terms of the successful lead generation mix, and what is inbound versus outbound, and what does good look like?
Yeah, I think often what you do want is obviously inbound activity is, that person is actively looking for you or actively looking to get more information from you. But often, actually, a lot of the activity you've done would be maybe more outbound activity to them to get them to that point. Especially from from looking at it from a marketer's perspective, the email campaigns, social campaigns, kind of all like you're sort of trying to generate them to get an interest and then generate that inbound activity. Obviously there is a place for outbound as well, as in is somebody showing an interest in something, some activity you're doing, in a webinar that you're doing, and then follow-up activity and ensuring that you've got that there just to see it. It doesn't have to be a heavy sell or anything like that. It's just can be a soft approach for outbound, to just see whether they they had any questions about the activity that they, or like the asset they downloaded, or the webinar activity, the webinar they watched. So I think it's good to have sort of a mix of both. But often, I guess from my perspective, I'm often aiming for that inbound activity. So somebody's sort of approached you.
Definitely, we'll talk more about tools in a minute. But Matt, as a someone who's regularly dealing with leads and contacting individuals, do you prefer it when you get inbound leads versus having to go outbound, or what's your perspective?
Yeah. Look, inbound inquiries, incoming inquiries are manna from heaven for a salesperson, because they're saying, tell me more, rather than you saying, do you want to know more? So it's really important, I think, to generate that. And if you can find tools that enable you to do both, because they do both have a place. I know there's a stigma around cold calling, and that's obviously not what we're talking about with outbound. You want focused calling, where you think there is definitely a legitimate reason for you to be contacting that company and offering your services. And then you've still got to, you've got to get past that gatekeeper and all that side of things with an outbound lead. But with an inbound lead, you can ring up and say, oh, well, Robin asked me to call him, and you're much more likely to get put through. So of course, inbound are better, but there is definitely a place for both, because you can absolutely control your activity on outbound in terms of your own, the amount of work you put into it. Whereas inbound, you're limited by the number of inquiries that you actually manage to generate.
Definitely, and it links back to the previous discussion we were having around, that brand building activity, and those longer term plays are what's really going to help build awareness and probably help a bit more on the inbound side, versus your day-to-day tactical activity is where you would supplement that with specific outbound activity, where you're going to have a lower success rate, but it's still a part of the process, like you say, that you can be in control of and help manage that to manage the overall funnel. I'm going to dive into a question actually, which I might ping straight back to you, Matt. We've had a question from Mike via the chat. As a second or even third tier supplier, how can we get the information on who is actually bidding for a contract?
Yeah. That's a good point. Well, obviously, I know where you're throwing that to me, because the company I work for tracks those sort of tenders. So, this isn't a sales pitch, but obviously, Glenigan is a construction information service which tracks tenders, it tracks the planning phases, it even tracks the construction and the subcontractors being added. So in terms of the main contract tenders, something like Glenigan is a fantastic tool to enable you to do that. And also you can even look at history as to who usually bids against each other. So if you only have one bidder on a project, you can actually infer who the other people are likely to be. And then your outbound activity becomes more targeted, and in that way, and you're not ringing up random companies, you're ringing ones that are likely to be involved in that project or are definitely involved in that project.
Brilliant. Okay. Great. Well, something that I just wanted to drop in here. Anyone who's tuned in for recent webinars on the marketing masterclasses will have probably seen this before, but this is our specification marketing cycle, which really is just a useful tool to kind of outline the key stages that you need to be thinking about in pushing your marketing activity towards specifiers. So, as we touched on earlier, every project is different, really, and sometimes product decisions are made very quickly. Sometimes at the early stages, sometimes at the later stages, often during specification, but sometimes there's consideration before that. And for manufacturers, really, it's essential that your marketing and lead gen activity speaks to each stage of this. So, everything from, CPD and brand building awareness activity at the outset, through to providing great quality information about your products to drive interest, and then the tools and specification data needed to support actual selection at the specification stage, and then supporting people through that. So, this is available to download on the MBS website. It's a broad tool, but it's certainly something that should be considered alongside your activity planning and everything that's going to feed into your lead generation funnel.
Can I just add, Robin, an important point here is that it may not be the same person that's involved in all of those steps. It's looking at the whole project team. So awareness, I would suggest, in some cases, a client can influence that as well as the architect or engineer. Certainly at the transition from specification through to construction and purchase, the main contractor and the installer are very key people. So as a manufacturer, you need to be engaging with all of them, giving them slightly different messages as well, because what matters to a client is different to that which matters to an architect, which matters to a installer. So it's not just those processes, it's recognizing the people, the personas that you need to be engaging with at those different stages.
Yeah, absolutely. Often very, very different decision makers involved at different stages who require different information and have a different influence on the project. Absolutely. Right, let's move on. And we could probably spend all day talking about number 4 item, but we wanted to talk about lead generation tools. So like I say, this could be a whole topic in itself, but Liam, I was wondering if you wanted to start with this, and let's start at the top, and then maybe we could deep dive into a few areas. So
yeah, absolutely.
Where do you start with this?
Yeah, so I had 3 things I wanted to talk about, and I'm not really delving into like software tools or anything like that. I'm more talking about things that can really help your organization generate leads. And I think the first thing I mentioned right at the beginning was about brand ambassadors. I think something that's really important to think about is a concept called alignment. And alignment's a concept about employees and team members being aligned to the strategy and brand of an organization. And the research shows that if those employees are aligned to strategy and brand, i.e. they understand where the business is going, they understand the values, they understand the purpose, where the board wants the business to get to, and understand those elements, they are much more likely, in fact, they're 4 times more likely to speak positively about the brand. So if you think about your team members within your organization, if they don't understand where the business is going, what the brand is about, etc., right the way through the organization, they're not going to be speaking well of the brand or in the way that you want them to do. And of course, everybody is a brand ambassador and will impact upon lead gen. So that was one thing that I just wanted to talk about. That internal communication is so important to make sure that works within an organization. The other thing that I wanted, which is a bit of a buzz at the moment, and it has been for a couple of years, is account-based marketing. And this, for those that know, this is about picking your prospects and then really targeting them based upon what they are looking for, what their challenges are, etc., and being very personalized in your approach. And it might be that you take 10, 50 prospects within your lead base that you want to go after, and then it's about taking them on a journey of discovery. We want to take them on that discovery through about your business and about what you do. So it's about that sort of here's what we know about the market. Here's what our customers say about us. Here's what our what our products can do for you. But being very, very personal in that approach and very focused on individuals within a particular organization. So I think that's something that can really generate really good results for higher value services and products within the marketplace. So that was the second thing that I just wanted to touch on. The third thing, which I think is absolutely essential and has been more so over the last 18 months than ever before, is insight. We now are in a marketplace where marketing is driven by digital. It's accelerated at a rate of knots over the recent time, and the tools are out there for you to be able to analyze and understand the interaction points and the impact of the campaigns that you're running through everything from the basics of Google Analytics, which give you, a lot of information if you want to really delve into it, to the more sort of expansive marketing platforms like HubSpot and Marketo. And I know that for a lot of small businesses, those platforms can be a little bit out of price range, etc., because they can be quite expensive. But there's other alternatives out there that can really give you those tools that you need. There's a platform called Simplify, for example, which is really cost effective and gives you the tools that you need similar to something like HubSpot, that allows you to start analyzing the information and the leads that are coming through. And why this is so important is something that I think people need to understand, is that by 2023, Google, Apple, and Android will all kill cookies within their websites, within their browsing, which means that as of that point, and Apple has already done so, you will not be able to track what is going on with activity that you push out there into the marketplace, advertising, search, etc. You won't be able to track the interaction, the key term that somebody has used to search for your product, the conversion point that has happened. So when you start thinking about your advertising and pushing that out, you're going to end up with very little data to use by 2023. So it's really important to make that start now, because what you're going to be dependent upon is first and zero-party data. Zero-party data is data that somebody has provided you with their information. That's why you need something like a HubSpot, Simplify, etc., to capture and then be able to track through what that person is doing with your organization, because they've given you their data. The other side of it is first-party data. And this is where Glenigan's, MBS, trade publications, etc., will provide a route to marketplace where you won't get as much information from other platforms out there, such as Google, when they start turning that off. So something to really think about is, between now and 2023, you need to change how you're doing your marketing, because by that point, you won't be able to track hardly anything through a lot of digital activity. And it's really important to start thinking about how you switch to first or zero-party data in the medium term.
Really interesting. Yeah. So I mean, Chris, just building on that, I mean, there are a million lead gen tools out there at the moment, aren't there? And there's a lot of ways, a lot of people that will take your money to try and sell you lead gen solutions. Clearly, building on what Liam's saying, there's different changes coming afoot in terms of the way cookies are captured. How would you recommend that manufacturers build an approach where they're blending kind of the right tools and thinking about the future in terms of what's going to be possible and what's going to be feasible?
Well, I think the first thing is to actually switch it from lead generation, which is, if you like, project selling, responding to an opportunity, to relationship building. And I would suggest that where you want to be is identifying those organizations which provide you with the best opportunities. And in fact, a tool like Glenigan is a really good starting point for doing that, because rather than just saying, oh, here's somebody who's working on a project, let's contact them, along with, I don't know, 6,000 other organizations, it's far better to use the Glenigan information to say, okay, the guys that do most of the projects that have a need or traditionally have used the products that we make are these ones. This is the sector which is showing a lot of growth. So let's focus on, let's start with health and education, I guess, would be fairly key opportunities in the next few years going forward. So, okay, health and education. Now, who is it that are the main specifiers, main contractors that are doing these things? They're the ones we want to build relationships with. Then use the tools that Liam's been describing, the other things, to start working towards that. So I would say it needs to have that overview, first of all, and not just be a knee-jerk reaction. Then you can, again, it's back to selecting the right people to try and build relationships with. And I can't let this go by without mentioning CPD, which is one of my favorite engagement tools. Really, really great way of starting to build that relationship on that side of things. But obviously it's all the content and things that Liam was talking about. But there again, we mustn't forget on the specification route that it's all about getting them to write a specification incorporating your product. So that's where you're aiming for. And of course, NBS fits in as being the tool of that. I'm not going to do the jobs of Matt and Izzy on anything anymore. But I think it's that relationship is the starting point. Building those relationships with the right people, the people that are going to give you the best return for your effort.
Absolutely. So Matt, how do you do that? How do you go about focusing on, quality over quantity? And what tools can support you in kind of ensuring that you're building those relationships and that you're not trying to do the hard sell on anyone too early?
Yeah. Thanks for your kind words there, Chris. That's really nice to hear. Always people who aren't directly involved with Glenigan saying nice things about us. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we have in our system is the ability to create ranking lists within specific data sets. So, for example, you could look at health and education nationally, regionally, and then you can apply the role you want the list to be about. So that could be anything from an M&E consultant or an architect or even a contractor or a subcontractor, and produce that priority list. So produce that hit list of companies where you're going to get the most bang for your buck if you get good relationships there, and obviously cross-reference that data with your existing clients. You end up with your gap analysis, you end up with your main businesses you can target that are going to give you the greatest return. So very, very easy now to do that. When I joined Glenigan 20 years ago, it was pieces of paper through the post. So people that have used Glenigan historically perhaps aren't aware of how we've developed. We now do things like we go to every single local authority website daily, multiple times a day, look for all of the new applications and approvals. We analyze all of the plans, look for the materials involved. We have to pigeonhole them. We don't have an infinite variety of materials that we're able to put on our leads, but we are even able to do custom word scrapes, for example. So if you've got a very specific product you're trying to launch, or a new material, or you're really trying to push out into the market, we can look for every instance of those keywords within planning applications throughout the UK and provide them to you, in a manageable form each week as well. So obviously Glenigan is a great tool to get you out to the market and to enable you to approach the market. And I think MBS is the other way around, and it enables the market to come to you. So I think the two-pronged approach, the pincer approach, if you like, with those two, is largely what you need in the first instance. Yeah,
brilliant. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, we've got a separate webinar that's available on our website where we kind of showcase how MBS and Glenigan complement each other. But Glenigan is very much about that project information. Now with NBS Chorus and NBS Source, what we have is thousands of specifiers specifying products every day, and thousands of projects in there. So being able to compare the two sets of data together to be able to see an early stage project within MBS and then see it going through to specification and all the products that it needs, and then pick that project up in Glenigan to start seeing what stage it's out of planning, who the main contractor is, who the key parties are, all the product types that it needs. It's a really powerful connected set of data. So please do check that out on the MBS website.
Just on that, Robin, you're talking about obviously specification being a really important part, and of course it is, but I remember the days when specification meant specification, but now you can't just say, right, job done, we've been specified. Yeah. You have to carry it through.
You have to protect it. Yeah, absolutely.
It has to say all similar now, doesn't it? And so I think that's really important to be able to track those specifications right the way through to actual completion.
100%. Izzy wanted to move on to another connected topic, which is around marketing automation. And from my experience with manufacturers, I would guess on the call we've got some companies that are really advanced with this and have all their data plugged in through a CRM and a marketing automation tool like the HubSpots and the Salesforces and so on that we were talking about there. But we've also probably got some that are maybe wanting to get on that journey but aren't quite there yet. How as a tool, how can marketing automation kind of support with lead generation? How can it improve the kind of the quality and the targeting and bringing all that data together?
I think the key thing which you said at the end there is that it does bring it all together. So you start having like an overview of the leads. I think like what I was mentioning earlier, when marketing will say a lead, it isn't a qualified lead at that stage, but it's still important. And what tools like marketing automation tools that like we do use Pardot and Salesforce, and what it enables us to do is then have a look at all of the data that we've started collecting on people and then see kind of the scoring. So you can then start seeing like, are they really engaged? Because if they're not that engaged at that point, it might mean that later down the line they will be more engaged. But we've got like a scoring system in place, so they have to hit a certain marker that we can then pass it over to sales. So I think it starts making, you know, just because somebody's come on your website, it doesn't mean automatically that they're necessarily somebody that sales should follow up with. The same with some of the marketing activity that we do. Some activity is a bit more, you know, it's just sort of awareness building, brand building, which we've talked about a lot. It's just getting them interested in your products. Well, just because they might download an asset doesn't mean that they're ready to be spoken to by or followed up with by sales. And what you're able to do with the tools that we've got at, you know, marketing automation is then sort of mark different downloads or different webinars or different scoring, so that you're not just passing everybody who does one thing over to sales. So you can avoid what Matt was mentioning earlier, where you don't want too many leads, you want like good leads. So I think that's kind of the benefits that you can get, and then it can help you also identify those, because you can, with the scoring, they can then get a different grading as well. So the grading can be built on the job title, the score that they've got, and then you know pull that all together and then start passing that over to sales at that point. So yeah, you just go into a lot more detail and also start automating the process, as opposed to having to rely on a lot of manual intervention, which can be very time consuming if you're managing lots of leads.
So we've neatly jumped into the next topic there, really, which was around managing leads. So, you know, I think really interesting point there. So if you're kind of still using, you know, MailChimp or whatever it might be to blast emails out to your prospect database, but you're not able to link that information back to what those prospects are doing elsewhere, you know, it makes it really hard to spot the ones that are the kind of most engaged. So you might have, you know, some of those people that you're emailing may also be visiting your website and reading all your content and following your social media. Others may not, but it's very hard to tell that without plugging that information together. So yeah, Chris, bring you in there. Please go on.
I think that another point with the marketing automation is the investment of time that's required to make it work effectively. And I think some organizations sort of think, oh, we bought the software, job done, this, and then that turns it into a spam machine, really. It sends out a load of rubbish. You've got to be prepared and have the resource to invest in thinking it through properly. For example, developing personas, setting it up, because if you don't put that time in to get it right for your business, then, as I say, it's just a spam machine, and then it works against you rather than for you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So, you know, for anyone who's not using one of these systems at the moment, you know, they allow you to set up usually a scoring system on your prospects, so that you can give people, say, 10 points for opening an email, 20 points for visiting the website, 50 points for filling out an inquiry form, whatever it might be. And then at that point, maybe when it reaches 100 points, you say, okay, that person now counts as a lead and they are ready for a conversation with sales. As Chris says, it takes a bit of time investment to go through that process and define your segments and personas and work out what works best. But by doing that, you then really avoid that, you know, that turning it into a spam machine, as Chris mentioned there. What about lead nurturing then, Liam? Because we touched on this earlier, and in order to get people from, you know, 0 points when they might be vaguely interested or have an awareness of you to 100 points and they're ready to have a sales conversation, you know, how do you do that in an effective way that isn't just spamming people?
Yeah, it's all about taking them on that through that funnel, and you know, that lead, when somebody fills in their detail on your website, is absolute gold, because at the end of the day, you've captured somebody's information that are interested in whatever it is you're talking about in your products. It's then about how you take them through that funnel, from discovery to education to consideration and to conversion. The conversion at the bottom is where you're then getting involved with the sales team and feeding those marketing qualified leads across to sales qualified lead, so they can manage that conversion element. But before that, you've kind of got this journey of saying, okay, you've made an inquiry about, maybe you've downloaded a piece of content that we put out there about some topic that you're interested in. The next thing we need to tell them about is, well, this is kind of what we do, and this is how we do it, and this is how we can expand. This is the challenges we answer, etc. And having that conversation with them through this automated process. And those that are engaging at that level, then you're going back to them and saying, oh, and here are some examples. This is the case studies, this is the testimonials. This is how other people have used our services and products to help them meet their challenges. So you're taking them through that journey that is kind of that logical thing of, firstly, they found you. Secondly, you want to educate them about who you are and more about what you do and how you can help. And then about that confirmation to them that actually you're the partner they should be working with. So that's coming back to the comment I made about cookies earlier. This becomes so much more important, because that input of data is your key thing that you can now use to deliver your sale at the end. And it will become more and more important. So having the right tools in your website that are integrated with that type of marketing automation platform, being able to feed that lead through, capturing that data, but also ensuring, and I've seen this so many times, the marketing teams go off and buy marketing automation platform. What they don't do is connect it to sales. And the sales team have their CRM, marketing have their CRM. They go, oh, how now we talk to each other? It should be integrated. You need to get your CRMs working together and have a seamless flow from one to the other. That's really important when you're putting these types of platforms in place.
Yeah, because the ultimate...
If I can just quickly add there, very brief point, it's about making sure that when the lead reaches sales, it's a matured lead, it's a hot lead, it's one where the person wants to talk. So sales aren't wasting their time with irrelevancies. It's marketing's job is to move it, to progress it to that stage.
Can I just, one other thing in that I meant to say, the other thing is about visibility, because this isn't just about getting a lead and then hopefully it becomes a sale. What you want to happen is that that this lead came from this activity, it went through this process, and at the end of it, it generated that sale. The marketing automation platform will allow you that visibility of that whole process, which then gives you, going back to the insight into what works. That's telling you which bit of marketing worked to actually generate sales at the other end. And that's quite often in the past been a real difficult thing for marketing to prove that what they've done here generated sales here. And so having that tool there that allows you to say that this came from click on a Google ad, and that then led to them downloading a piece of information. Then we sent them 3 different emails or whatever, and that took them on a journey. It went to sales, and it made £500,000 project. That is so important, and that's what these tools give you to be able to use.
Yeah, absolutely. So Matt, just building on that, what top tips would you have in terms for manufacturers in terms of managing leads and making the most effective use of the process?
Yeah, Liam stole my thunder a little bit there. I was going to...
Sorry, Matt. Sorry.
Well, it must be right then.
I'm going to talk about tracking the lead source, because I work with so many businesses that have a central CRM, and they get the guys to either type it all in, or they feed it in maybe through an API, or they manually import the data from a variety of sources. But then they don't even have a drop-down box to say where that lead actually came from. And I think that is absolutely critical to understanding where your time should be best spent. A tool like Glenigan has built-in lead management functionality. So it enables you to follow a project or follow a company, put on a note, put on a future recall, even tagging, so that you can sort of segment the data and be able to pull it out of the database very quickly. So but not everybody is, a lot of, particularly in construction, we have, some certain aging sales forces, perhaps, who are a little bit technophobic, and they don't want to sit in front of a computer and do all of that work. So making it easy for salespeople is very, very important, which is where that pre-qualification comes in. But ultimately, leading it back to where that initial lead came from is absolutely critical. So I think a central CRM is probably the best option. If you can get one that does everything, I mean, we use Salesforce as the basis of Glenigan and the basis of our system, in fact, the architecture, and I find it very powerful. But whether it's a panacea for everybody, you know, I'm not sure. You'd have to find your own solution. But I do think a central CRM is a key point in terms of managing that marketing and sales interaction.
Brilliant. Yeah. So few questions coming through actually on CRM. So we'll come back to those in a moment, and we've still got loads of people on the line. So we'll run on for a couple more minutes. But please do get any questions in via the Q&A, and we'll make sure we answer those in just a moment. So just kind of building on that actually is on to our kind of final point of discussion really, which links on nicely from what we were just talking about, was really around measuring success. So, you know, ultimately we're looking to drive revenue and sales, but in terms of measuring success and using that to enhance the process, you know, what are the things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, so with measuring success, I think it's looking at the different teams. So for sales, obviously, it is the revenue that they're focusing on. I think when we were talking earlier about the difference between marketing qualified leads and leads, there will be some marketing activity where I'll be really pleased with like the number of like downloads, for example. We've got an asset that we've just launched. They may not be directly marketing qualified leads ready to go over to sales, but actually you can tell that there's like a good level of engagement, and actually that asset there, the purpose there was to do some brand building, some like raise awareness of who we are and what we do. So measuring, you know, can be down to measuring sort of leads, like number of leads on an asset or an activity that you've been working on. But then obviously going through to sort of the more lead generation side, it's then focusing on, you know, how many MQLs or like marketing qualified leads have we generated this month? How many of those then turned into sales qualified leads and then went on to generate like a sale? Sometimes it's, you know, can be, you know, I think often I will look at the conversion from marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead as my sort of like solid marker. Not that I don't have an interest in the revenue, obviously I do, but I think that marker really tells me that the salesperson has actually like identified that lead has got some legs to it, and that there's definitely an opportunity sort of there, because often there's lots of other factors that can come into play after sort of like the opportunity stage, which sometimes marketing doesn't have any control over. So yeah, for me that you know, the conversion between the marketing qualified and the sales is important, but I think it's also going back to that brand building, looking at your assets and activity, and not dismissing just because you didn't generate a marketing qualified lead from it doesn't mean that it might not turn into a marketing qualified one further down the line. So going sort of like quite specific on your campaign activity too.
Chris, we mentioned CPD a bit earlier. How do you go about measuring success for an activity like CPD, whereby there's, you know, it's really around brand building and awareness, but it's not always easy to demonstrate that link with sales?
Yeah, sadly, a lot of companies target their people just on delivering a CPD seminar. Obviously, in today's environment, slightly different from 2 years ago. So we're not having the face-to-face CPDs that there were. But it tends to be a bit, we will do this number of CPDs. And really, CPD is just a step on the way. The important thing is the specification. So I would say the measure of success is that firstly, the organization you presented the CPD to have adopted your product specification, and then longer term that the projects they work on are using your product. So that's the end result, because even if they say it's a great idea, if we like the spec, if it's still not turning into an order, it's not working. So I would say it's looking at the specifications and the adoption and use of your spec stroke product on various projects is the top thing.
Absolutely, and we've got research data that we shared before that does show that a significant number of people that attend CPDs do then go on to specify products of those manufacturers. But you know, that's where, you know, making that link is really useful, because ultimately where you want to be is in the spec, but CPD is about getting in front of people and building that awareness. And then, you know, if you've got the right tools in place, it is possible to track that through. Mm-hmm. Liam, any final points on this topic before we move on to taking questions from the audience?
Just a small thing, just feeding on from what Izzy said, really. I think it's very, very important that you map out your lead generation process in detail. So you know what the stages are, and then set your KPIs based upon those interaction points. Having KPIs that are based upon your, what's gone on in the past, your goals for growth in those different areas, just gives you something to measure against. And sometimes KPIs, are there to be beaten. Other times they are there as a guide just to understand how successful a piece of activity is. If you don't put them in place, and you don't put them in place from the outset, you're really kind of just guessing whether that's been a good or bad activity. So mapping it out, putting the KPIs in place, just gives you that visibility of understanding a bit more about how successful things are, and then be able to feed back into that in the loop.
And just to expand on that point, which I agree with you entirely, Liam, it's those different steps of, if you like, the machine, the sales machine, that take you from the initial lead opportunity through to the delivery of the product and invoicing it. As you say, measure each step, but then you can also start to be more scientific in determining what necessary leads there are. Because if you know the relationship, you can then say, okay, if we want to grow our business by 10%, or we want to move into this new sector, or whatever it is, that equates to this number of leads. Now, how are we going to go about getting them? So it's all about measurement, and then interpreting that, not just measuring for the sake of measuring. It's using that information to make decisions, the right decisions.
Absolutely. The most successful approaches we probably seen are where an organization, whether it be a manufacturer or anyone else, is taking those kind of business goals and revenue targets, and then breaking them down into sales targets, and then breaking them down further into marketing targets, based on assumptions and so on, and then being able to link that to an activity plan and measure that through, so that you can actually see directly how marketing activity is linking to and contributing to those activities. Of course, that's the dream, and usually, that needs a bit of flexing and adjustment as you go through the year. But that process is extremely effective if you can implement it. Brilliant. So we've got a few questions through, so we'll probably just run on for 5 or 10 more minutes, just answering a few questions that have come through on the Q&A. Please do post questions if you have any more. But I wanted to start with one that we've got around CRM, which has been a bit of a topic. So Michelle has asked around how HubSpot is way out of our budget at the moment. Is there a cheaper or free CRM system that you could suggest? Liam, I think you mentioned one earlier.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I don't work for them, but it's there's a platform called Simplify, which is a small company out of Northern Ireland that have built up their own platform, which basically will give you all the tools you need, similar to something like HubSpot. It's not as sophisticated, but it will give you everything you need as a starting point, including CRM and traceability and access actually to a lot of data. They've got database organizations feeding into it as well. We use it for a few clients, and it's very flexible, gives you a lot of visibility, and it's only about £300 a month. So it's pretty cheap compared to HubSpot's, which can be considerably more.
Just to add another point on that, I think we have to be cautious with the likes of HubSpot. I mean, I think HubSpot's a really great tool, but it's been developed with the likes of Amazon and others in mind, who have millions of potential customers. If you look at the construction industry, it's a fairly finite number of people. And so sometimes I think the cost and effort involved in setting up an automation is more than it justifies. And it might be better to just have points where there's human intervention. And certainly if you're setting things up, maybe just at certain points, rather than trying to have some kind of process there, you just have somebody who looks at it and says, right, I'll do that, I'll do this, and then moves it on. So don't be too quick to spend money on something that might be over sophisticated for our industry.
Yeah, no, it is certainly possible to over-engineer things when you're talking about CRM solutions and marketing automation and so on. I think, agree, it's very much horses for courses, depending on the size of business that you are, who you're targeting, and how many leads you're likely to be generating and so on, and the volumes that you're talking about. Matt, there's a question here about Glenigan and understanding more about how and when project data on Glenigan is, how does Glenigan generate project data, and how accurate is it, and how is it maintained?
Yeah, Okay, lovely. What we do is we collate data from a wide variety of sources, primarily the planning offices around the UK and Ireland, but also from things like trade and national press, social media, and even strategic partnerships with organisations like Considerate Constructors Scheme, Builders Conference, and others. So we also have a 100+ strong research team who do all of the plan analysis, all of the data input, and phone work to track those projects. So we enrich that project data as we track the projects through the planning stages, through pre-outline and detailed planning to plans approved, and then through the tender process from pre-tender into the tender, who's bidding, who's the main contractor, site goes live, and who are the subcontractors. So there's a huge amount of phone work that goes on, along with a lot of nifty technology at the early stages to get hold of that information so we know which projects to track.
Brilliant, brilliant. And am I right in thinking there's kind of 300,000 live projects on there at any one moment in time?
It's actually almost double that at the moment. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Okay. Brilliant. Brilliant.
You know, we've got 30 to 40 years worth of historical information that you can use for analysis as
Yeah.
well, the trends within material use and that sort of thing as well. I know somebody touched on GDPR as well. So one of the things with a tool like Glenigan is we've been externally audited in terms of our data gathering and publishing processes, which means that you are legitimately able to use any data that we publish in your own marketing activity. And all you really have to worry about is a subscriber list, you know, an opt-out list. So if you're doing mass email marketing, which also you know, comes with its own pitfalls, I think the key thing is if the data that you put into that is already sort of pre-qualified to some degree and you're legitimately able to use it, then, you know, there's very little worries around GDPR for using that sort of data rather than just going through the yellow pages as it used to be and calling people randomly. So I think something like Glenigan enables you to get past that initial step so that you can confidently approach these companies and use that data knowing that you're allowed to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a question that's come through on the chat actually. So building on that around the GDPR aspect. So, you know, with multiple, thanks for the question, Peter, with multiple sources of data, including potentially personal data, how does the panel advise companies to ensure processes are GDPR compliant, but also easy to use and effective?
I can jump in on that if you wish.
Go on, Liam. Yeah.
Something I'd spend a lot of time talking about GDPR, or have done. Always with the caveat, please ask legal advice, because it can be expensive. But I think there's a few key things to think about with GDPR that from a B2B perspective. So firstly, if you're going to go out and look for data and you're going to purchase data, you have to ensure that it's opt-in data. So if you're going to buy data, it's opt-in data and it's business email addresses, not personal email addresses. Okay, it's an absolutely key thing, which is where Matt was mentioning a minute ago. The other thing is that once you've got your data, you can use what is called legitimate interest to set out why you're communicating with an individual from a business case and from a case that it's not going to be the detriment of them, for example. So you can do an assessment, the legitimate interest assessment, that basically says, okay, I'm sending information about my products to somebody within the industry who would be interested in these products because it would help solve the challenges of their organization, etc., etc. You can build out a legitimate interest around that as long as, and this is where it's so important, you are only communicating to business email addresses. If you have personal email addresses, you shouldn't at all communicate with personal. So that's like a Gmail or an Outlook or something like that. Just take them out of your data unless they have filled in a form on your website and have ticked the box to say they are happy for you to contact them. If you don't have that for that individual with a personal email address, do not use it. But for business email addresses, as long as what you're communicating to them is relevant to their job and their role and their organization, legitimate interest covers that and allows you to do it. It was always going to be this big thing about GDPR. I'm not going to be able to market to anybody again. From a B2B perspective, it's not true. You've still got these routes to be able to market and use data. You just have to be very careful that you don't use any personal data, i.e. personal email addresses.
And just to build on that, Liam, the where to be wary of is with the small tradesmen. I know most of what we've been talking about is larger organizations, but if people are targeting tradesmen, a lot of them use a Gmail or other personal address. So that's where you've got to be particularly cautious.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we actually use filters on all of our forms now to filter those out so that we're only ever collecting company email addresses. So if you try and put in a Gmail, it just won't accept it. Which is one tool to use. One
thing on that, for those that it is a bit of a challenge with LinkedIn, for people that do use LinkedIn to target audiences and to capture data. LinkedIn has a tool called lead gen forms, which is really, really useful, because to download a piece of information, somebody clicks on it, a form comes up in LinkedIn, they fill in their details, or they're auto-filled, and then they can download the document, which, is great because it gives you the information. Problem is, almost everybody using LinkedIn uses a personal email address, not a business email address. So you have to make sure that once that person's done it, they have ticked the box that you can communicate with them. And it's the same with, as we go forward with remarketing, you have to make sure that you're covering off those GDPR elements with remarketing as well.
Oh, absolutely. And Matt, did you have something to add on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when GDPR came out, everybody tightened up their processes, and I think that is really accomplished what GDPR was about. I totally agree. You shouldn't be looking at personal emails, and Glenigan do not publish any personal email addresses. In fact, we have a part of our product is home improvers and self-build at that very smaller end of the market, and they tend to be personal individuals rather than companies. So we just don't publish any email data there for that reason. But I think it's important to understand GDPR is not designed to stop businesses talking to each other and to harm the economy. In actual fact, it's just designed to protect individuals from, harassing emails or constant contact from people that they don't want. So as long as you follow the procedures and manage your subscriber list and you have a legitimate reason to contact people, I think, the government wants us to be talking to each other and doing business with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. All right. Final question before we wrap up, from Robert, who explains that he's using MBS Source and our IBA CPD to target architects and specifiers. Two parts to this question, actually. Firstly, how, probably for you, Izzy, in terms of how manufacturers should really, use NBS Source as part of their Source and Chorus as part of their marketing activities to target specifiers. And then a more general question actually around everything we've talked about in terms of it getting harder and harder to target architects and specifiers with changes in legislation and everything like that. What else should manufacturers consider in the future? So Izzy, do you maybe want to cover the first part around Source, and then we'll open it up from there?
Yeah, so with I think when you get activity, like you purchase like CPD, like Reader CPD, and you've got a subscription, and you've spent all that time developing the content, and the same with Source, like getting your listing up to the standards that Source requires. It's not a case of then just maybe leaving it and then just hoping that it's going to kind of generate itself. You've invested a lot of time and energy into those subscriptions, so it's then also like making them part of your overall marketing campaign. So having a campaign for the fact that your activity is on Source, we developed a Source partner logo to help encourage people to share and shout about the fact that they're on Source. So it can be, there's a lot of passive traffic that you'll get from just generally general users going onto Source or going into Chorus and then pulling data or pulling products from Source into their specifications. There will be passive lead gen that you can get from that, but it's also making sure that you're shouting about the fact that you're on these platforms, and also with CPD, pushing that and doing your own campaign for it as well. So
absolutely. And the other thing that because of the integration between Source and Chorus, it allows manufacturers to actually work with specifiers directly in the specification tool, doesn't it? So that they can write the specs with the architect and make sure that it's absolutely correct, and also see that they're getting in the project.
Yeah, and yeah, the thing about getting in the projects and also checking your add to specification stats as well, and making sure you're regularly going into your Source analytics platform and checking to see who's added you to specifications, who's downloaded your BIM objects. So you can then start doing that relationship building that we've talked about before.
We've got some updates coming to that as well, haven't we? Where there's going to be, you know, over the next few months, more and more data in there for manufacturers to see, and also looking at how we link that with Glenigan data, so that we've got both projects, products, all in one place, so that, you know, manufacturers should have a really unique set of data across the timeline, so they could really get a lot of insight on who's specifying their products on what projects, who the key contacts are, and so on. So just the second part of that question then, in terms of it, you know, getting harder and harder to architects, just to market to architects, just a couple of minutes really, probably from the panel on what manufacturers should be thinking about over the next few years and focusing on in order to keep that relevance and activity.
Quality content. I think that's the important thing. It always has been. If they're posting blog articles, they've got technical articles through the various sources available to get them published, that's going to draw in people. So for example, an article that links back to the CPD. So the call to action is to request the CPD. It always has been, as I say, and it always will be. It's quality content. Then the architects will find it when they're Googling for information.
Absolutely. Any more to add on that, guys?
Yeah, I'll just say that, you know, HubSpot is a great proponent of what they call hub and spoke, and that, as Chris is saying, that quality content with supporting content is really important in building out a story around a topic, so that people are engaging at multiple different levels with that topic that you want to talk about and own within the marketplace. And that's going to improve not just the interaction, but also your SEO as well around that topic. So yeah, I concur with Chris on that. I think content is a really important thing, but also that ability to demonstrate to your audience that you know what you're talking about. So you understand the market, you understand their challenges, you understand what they need from their for their business to succeed and their projects to succeed. Being able to provide something that they don't know is really important.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And a final question that I'll just quickly answer that's come through from Heber on the chat around what guidance would we give to help marketers communicate with leads at the right time to drive sales. I would say definitely have a look at the specification marketing cycle that I pulled up on the presentation earlier. You can download it on the MBS website. It's got the whole cycle on it, and it's also got kind of lists of all the different types of lead gen and marketing type tools that you can use alongside that, so that you can really work through it and work out which ones are most relevant to you, and start experimenting and testing with those to drive that activity. So that's it really. I just finally mention, if anyone hasn't seen MBS Source, any manufacturers on the line, please do have a look. It helps you get your products exposed across the project timeline, all the way from kind of early stages through to specification and into the actual spec tool to work directly with specifiers in there. So as we mentioned, combined with Glenigan and some of the other tactics that we've talked about on the call today, really powerful solution. So that's it. That just leaves me to thank all the panelists. It's been absolutely fantastic hearing all of your insights today. So Chris, Liam, Matt, Izzy, thank you so much. It's been a really healthy conversation. We've had fantastic numbers on the line again, and loads of great questions through. For everyone that's on the line, we'll drop you an email through afterwards to thank you for attending, but we'll also include everyone's contact details who's been on the call, and you'll be able to make contact with them to follow up if you wish. So thanks again. Please join us again next time. We'll continue to keep running these series, and any feedback or anything else on our webinars, please do let us know. And thank you again for joining us. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.